Hello, class. Let's finish up fluid and electrolytes. So today we'll talk about a lot about acid base, your pH of your body, and yeah, a lot of good stuff. Last lecture, hopefully you got it with the looking at where your water and electrolytes, the input, the outputs. All right, we'll talk about dehydration today. Let's get right to it. All right. So again, let's take a look at our inputs and outputs. So we pee out, it depends, but 2.5 liters, something like that. Where it comes in is mostly drinking in our fluids, and then in our wet foods. And then lastly, metabolic water that we get just from chemical reactions that release water. Then fluid loss, mostly the urine. So we have to pee and it takes water. We get rid of it that way. In the feces, the waste is going to have to get rid of some water that way. And then from your skin, either just evaporation or sweating, as a way to speed that up. So that's the input, that's the output. All right. Took this picture of a albatross in the Galapagos Islands, and it's got this white crystals coming down its beak. And really that is salt. And so, but these birds are amazing. They can't even take off from the ground. Normally they're so big, but they live on these islands with cliffs, and they spend most of their life just flying around the world on the oceans. And they never drink fresh water. They eat fish, and so they accumulate a lot of salt, right? And so they have a way of a salt gland to get rid of salt. And Galapagos iguanas do this too. You'll see them sneezing, and this like mist comes out, this salty water comes out. But as you imagine making a salt gland, it's not something that we have, but it takes energy. You just have cells that will pump sodium. I bet chloride goes with it, and because you're concentrating the salt in a salty solution. Whenever you concentrate something, it takes energy, right? Diffusion goes the other way, from high to low. If you want to go from low to high, you want to concentrate the salt, you got to use energy. But they do that. They use some water, but mostly they get rid of that salt as salt, coming out like that. All right, let's talk dehydration. And some studies, you guys know the importance of drinking enough water. You athletes know the importance of drinking enough water when you exercise. And there's reports of people being chronically dehydrated. It's going to cause, we talked about kidney stones is one issue. Yeah, and so it's going to happen, dehydration, when your output exceeds your input. This is all a balance, right? All a balance. So either you could be sweating profusely, or you could just have lack of access to water. Whatever it's going to be, you're going to shift this balance towards less water in your body. You're going to lose weight actually and dry up. In fact, in a lot of diets, you lose weight early on because of the lack of water, because you get stored glycogen, holds a lot of water. So everyone's excited at the beginning of the diet when they lose that weight, and then it plateaus. So anyway, what's going to happen, of course, is that, here's your cell, organelles, and then here's the water. Here's the water outside of it, normally like this. So here's equilibrium. There's no osmosis going on. But if you lose water, all of a sudden it's going to become more concentrated outside the cell. And then the water is going to be sucked out of the cell, and the cell will shrink up. So that's the big fear, is that your cells all shrink because the water sucked out as your body fluids become more and more concentrated. And you need water, especially if you're exercising in the sun in order to sweat, to lose heat. And so once you get really dehydrated, you can easily get hyperthermia because you've lost that ability. And in heat stroke, it's fine early on when you're sweating profusely. It helps you get rid of that heat. But then as it goes on, when your body has less and less water, you can't sweat anymore, and your skin becomes dry and red. And that's a real danger zone there, because your body's got to prioritize. Do you want the water for your blood to keep your blood pressure high, or do you want to sweat? And it's like, okay, we can't be sweating out all this water. And of course, when you dehydrate, you guys know you want to just not drink distilled water. You want to replace electrolytes too, replace the water and the electrolytes. And we'll talk a lot more about dehydration. You can see, your urine output decreases a lot. Your kidneys decide to be stingy with the water. And your urine becomes uh, small in amount and dark. Yeah. So again, causes. I mean, one is you don't have access to water. You're working out, you didn't bring any water, you're going to become dehydrated. And then, of course, a lot of the world, access to clean water. We live in Maine also. This is more environmental science, but we have access to all this water. But if you lived out west, even the Midwest, I mean, in places like Nevada and California, I mean, water, there's just so many people and we try to grow so many crops with it. But we're kind of lucky here where there's not a big shortage of water. But anyway, now your inability to drink, look at this. If you have, tonsillitis or you have a painful mouth, you can't swallow. So that's also going to lead to dehydration. Excessive sweating, of course, if it's really hot and dry conditions, you're going to lose a lot of water that way. And then vomiting and diarrhea. I don't think about that, but if you're very sick, it's a big problem as you become dehydrated. And especially children that get E. coli, salmonella, or cholera, all these diseases that your body rightfully, we're talking about digestive system, wants to flush that out. So you have diarrhea to get rid of the bad, but you take all that water that you should have reabsorbed in your large intestine back into the blood, you just get rid of it. And so it's a big killer is this dehydration associated with diarrheal diseases. Or excessive vomiting. You're just getting rid of all this fluid. You try to drink and you vomit it up. So big cause. And then of course, if this is a severe issue here, you go to the hospital and they put you on an IV and they replace the fluids. But other parts of the world, that's not an option. Post-it burns, yeah. Polyuria means you pee a lot. And there's a disease, diabetes insipidus, where you have an ADH problem, you pee gallons. But even diabetes, the normal diabetes mellitus, problem with insulin, is you pee out glucose and then it takes water with it. It's called an osmotic diuretic. Anything that's within the that's in the filtrate, you want to be really watery, very dilute. But if you have glucose in there, it's going to keep the water there. So normally the water would be retained, sucked back out. But if you have a bunch of sugar in there, it keeps the water, doesn't get retained as much. So uncontrolled diabetes with glucose in your urine, you pee out a lot more water because the sugar keeps the water in the urine. All right. And of course, these signs, and again, those you see a lot of athletes in the class. This is something that you really look out for, when you're out doing 2-a-days or long practices in the summer, and there's real possibility of death and dehydration incidents. So the importance of keeping hydrated. I think a lot of you understand. But some of the things that happen to dehydration, we just take a look. Dehydration in a person, you're going to often see tachycardia. You're going to see a rapid but shallow pulse, and then rapid breathing too. Pulse is rapid but weak, because as you lose fluids, you're going to have low blood pressure, right? Because remember, blood pressure is one function is the amount of water, amount of fluid, right? The more fluid, the more blood pressure. And so you're going to see that. Mental status, again, as you get severe, can start being affected. Your eyes can become sunken. You don't make tears. Your mouth dries up, and then your skin won't snap back because that's some of that around the eyes too. You'll see if you're dehydrated. The skin is very thin and delicate around your eyes, and if it's you're dehydrated, it darkens and it shows real easily. And of course, urine output. If you're not making urine, it means you could be severely dehydrated. Yeah, and let's take a look. Look at this. And babies, actually, old people and infants can get dehydrated real easily. Their kidneys don't work as well to regulate this, and an infant doesn't have that much body water in the first place. But take a look at this infant. We're seeing, oh yeah, so you'll see sunken eyes and not making any tears, and then the fontanelles, soft spots, will be sunken in because even cerebrospinal fluid will be less. Yeah. And then doesn't seem really with it, the baby. dry mouth, rapid tachypnea, rapid breathing, rapid heart rate, but low blood pressure. Oliguria means doesn't make that much urine, and the capillaries, if you push down it, they don't refill that much. Yeah, so all these things is as a sign of dehydration. Get this kid on an IV, get the fluids, electrolytes, coming back. All right, so you guys should be able to recognize dehydration, some of the things that happen. What about the other? Can you drink too much water? Oh, of course not, right? Water, right? Good for you. False. You can drink too much water. And the book talks about how they looked at people would drop dead after a long race, a marathon, and from too much water. And they did a study looking at a bunch of marathoners, and like 13% had hyponatremia. So natremia, this is the sodium, right? Na is sodium, right? So hypo means less. And it's not really, you don't have less sodium, but you have more water, so you're more diluted. Like you can look at this picture here. So if you have too much water in you, the concentration of sodium goes down. I talked about how electrolytes and water are related because they're dissolved in each other, right? So that's the big issue here. If you just drink water, you're going to dilute all the electrolytes, but sodium here is super important. It's the most common electrolyte. And then if that happens, it becomes really watery out there. That water is going to just rush into the cells. Remember I drew a cell earlier and I showed you, I think I showed you dehydration. Now imagine, here's the normal electrolytes. They're the same in and out, right? But now I can erase. That's not bad. But now look at that. Now you're going to have so much stuff in the cell that water is going to come in and it will bloat the cell up. And imagine your brain cells like that, So this will happen too. You'll see some fraternities will have hazing where they make people just drink all this water. They make them pee themselves, stand there and keep drinking water as they pee themselves. And so tragically, healthy college age kids die, these tragic deaths because of stupid, pranks like that. So water intoxication, too much water causes hyponatremia, where your sodium is so dilute that you don't have normal functions, your cells swell, and death follows pretty quickly. All right, so you can have hypernatremia. You can have too much sodium. It's almost always because you've lost a bunch of water for some reason and just become really concentrated. Sure, and so like a hyponatremia, talked about drinking too much. If you remember Addison's disease, we talked about Cushing's and Addison's disease in terms of cortisol, but your adrenal glands, if they don't make enough hormones, they don't make enough cortisol and aldosterone. That's one of them too from the adrenal cortex. And aldosterone is what makes you retain sodium in your kidney tubes. So in Addison's disease, you don't make enough aldosterone and you just pee out the sodium. So you have hyponatremia. It's another cause of it. Like, so if your kidneys get rid of too much sodium or just drink too much water, either case, you're going to have hyponatremia, not enough. Yeah, and both hypo and hyper, cause coma, death eventually, right? It's not very good. Now we're talking about sodium, but potassium and sodium are always linked. You look here, is a sodium potassium pump, right? You take, remember potassium's high in the cell and sodium's high out the cell. So you're always pumping those two. In your kidneys, when you retain sodium, when you take sodium back, you get rid of potassium. So they're always related. And so this is kalemia, K, looking at the potassium. So you can have hypo or hyperkalemia. So recognize that as being not enough or too much potassium. And that causes major issues too. In the hospital, in pharmacy, you look at what are their, when you want to give a diuretic or something like that, well, what's their potassium levels, and if potassium levels are off, you're going to die. If they're too far off. We use potassium in lethal injection to stop the heart. So it's going to cause arrhythmias, all kinds of problems with muscle contraction. So potassium has to be just right. And it's kind of linked to sodium there too. And so complicated, but you can have too much or too little potassium that causes problems. All right, so let's talk pH. I don't know you guys how well you know me, but one of the big things that bothers me is the whole, how do I say, the whole people selling you stuff in your health that's just crap, that it's not based in science. And people, you need a cleanse. Your cleanse is necessary. If you've got kidneys and a liver, you don't need a cleanse. And it's just some things to talk about, and selling you, supplements you don't really need, and these fad diets that don't really work, anyway, these kind of things. But one of the things is pH. It's really big now. It's like, well, people decided we can make money because the public will kind of believe, because pH sounds scientific, and maybe, oh, if I change my pH, I'll lose weight and be healthier, but let me just tell you, all right, your pH is going to be between 7.35 and 7.45. If it goes much beyond that, you're dead, you die. All right, very, very quickly. So drinking a little bit of lemon water or alkaline water ain't going to change your pH. Your body is going to buffer that right away. In fact, Gwen, no, she sells alkaline water. And I remember there's an ad where it even says, put a slice of lemon for. Lemon is acid. You put it in alkaline water, it's going to neutralize it. It's just, yeah. Anyway, people that don't understand science but just want to sell you things, you got to be careful about that. So, you have a pH in your body that is regulated by your kidneys and your lungs and your buffering system, we'll see. And so, your diet's going to have very little effect on changing the pH of your body. All right. So that narrow range of pH, why do you have to be there? Why does it have to be so narrow? So it's important in chemistry too. In chemistry lab, you want to sometimes put a buffer, because chemical reactions, they work well at a certain pH, certain range anyway. And if you go off of it, the chemical reactions don't work. So in your body, you can imagine, you're nothing but chemical reactions. So the pH has to be just right. And you can see, you can make graphs like this where enzyme activity and pH, so this is where you want to stay. If you get too acidic or too alkaline, the reaction's crap, you're not going to be able to live like that. Yep. And so what are acids? Acids are going to be electrolytes that release hydrogen ions, right? And then bases are going to be electrolytes that are going to absorb hydrogen ions, mostly hydroxyl, OH, right? OH, hydrogen ions over here. So you see they come together and neutralize and turn into water, right? But yeah. And so a strong acid releases a lot of hydrogen ions, completely releases it. A weak acid releases hydrogen ions, but sometimes it holds on to them. Same thing with the base. Yeah, so why is it important to have the right pH? Because you can see all of our body is chemical reactions and enzymes that catalyze those. And so we need the right pH for those reactions to take place. All right, well, it turns out the chemical reactions in our body lean towards giving off acids. And here's some examples. When you burn sugar, what gives off? Carbon dioxide. All your muscles, all your cells. Carbon dioxide turns into carbonic acid. And there you go. So burning sugar. What about anaerobic? Let's say you don't use oxygen and you go through glycolysis. We make lactic acid. Freaking acid, right? So these things are both acids. Burning sugar with oxygen or without oxygen, you give off acid. And then we'll talk about when you burn fats, you give off these ketones, which are acidic. I'll talk a lot more about that. And then, if you're breaking down proteins, amino acids, remember there's the amino acids, some have sulfur and phosphates. You're going to have sulfuric and phosphoric acid coming off. Yeah, so all these things contribute to making us kind of acidic. But remember, I told you our pH is 7.35 to 7.45. That's slightly basic. So clearly we're doing some of these acids. And that's why our P is usually acidic, because we're getting rid of those excess hydrogen ions to keep ourselves a little bit basic. All right, we're going to talk about ketoacidosis. Ketones, you see down below, I mean, acetone, oxaloacetate, you know, all these chemicals. So a ketone is a ketone, the chemistry people. But the deal is when we burn fatty acids, we make ketones. And normally I got ketones and I use them as energy, get rid of them, no problem. So as long as you make a few ketones in normal activity. But there's a case where you're just burning fatty acids, you make lots of ketones, and then you become more acidic, you get acidosis. And it can happen like in a starvation diet where you're just burning fats. And so you have lots of ketones. I know a lot of you interested in nutrition, I bet too. And so people, keto diets and people want to go into ketoacidosis to a point, you know, so that maybe this is real familiar to some of you that are really into it. But let me just talk about it. Normally, you burn fats, you make ketones, and it's okay, you use them. But when it's out of control ketones, your body becomes more and more acidic, and you can die. Okay. Oh, the deal why so obviously starvation diet, but also if you're a diabetic, I'll show you what happens. Yeah, so you're diabetic, and what that means is that your cells sit there, and all around them in the blood is glucose. Oh my God, there's the sugar, but they can't get into the cell because you need insulin to bring the glucose in the cell so it can burn the sugar, make ATP. But this poor thing is like in a sea of water with nothing to drink. There's the sugar out in the blood, but it can't get in the cell. And so you can see without it, hypoinsulin, not enough insulin, there's no glucose getting in the cell. So the cell's got to burn fats, fatty acids, and you're going to have ketone bodies, which are acidic, and they're going to go, you're going to have them, you're going to find that in your urine, you become acidosis, like coma death. All right. So if you're out of control, not burning carbs or burning fats, you have ketone bodies are going to rise and you go into a coma. And then, of course, you know, if that sugar is not going into your cells, you're going to have hyperglycemia, right? Too high a blood sugar. And that's going to make you have glucose in your urine. Here's some terms for you guys. You're going to, polyuria means a lot of urine. You're going to pee a lot. It's going to have sugar in it because it's going to draw the water out, making you dehydrated. Yeah, and then you're going to be very thirsty because you're dehydrated. All right, yeah. So that's the deal with ketones is they come from burning fats, and so could be purposely where you have a diet of just fats and no carbs at all, or with diabetes, your cells are starved of the sugar, and so they have to burn fats, and so ketones can build up. And in lab, we'll test your ketones. We'll see how you guys are. You shouldn't have high ketones. Oh, who knows what you're doing? Maybe you do. All right, let's continue. So, like I say, strong acids like hydrochloric acid, you put that in water, it all turns into hydrogen and chlorine, strong acid. A weak acid would be like when we did carbonic acid, and that's going to turn into hydrogen ions, and then it's going to be hydrogen ions and then bicarbonate ions. And so but not all of it. I'm going to put it back and forth. So it's going to be more of a weaker thing. Same thing with the bases. All right. So as I said, our normal metabolic reactions, usually more acids come off. Talked about all the different reasons why. And indeed, yeah, talked about there. And then we need to get rid of these excess acids. And so there's going to be three mechanisms. You've just got buffers. You're going to see you have chemicals that are going to buffer. Remember, a buffer is going to keep things, it's going to buffer against big changes. It's going to keep things in a narrow range. Here, looking at acidity too, we can look at here in the Northeast. I would go fishing up in northern New York. It's kind of like Maine, looks like Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire. And the brook trout, we get hundreds and hundreds when I was a kid, and then fewer and fewer. Probably not because I'm a great fisherman, but we know from acid rain that these big coal burning plants down in Ohio, West Virginia, all they're are going to blow this smoke that has sulfur in it. So sulfuric acid comes down. Nitrogen from our exhaust makes nitric acid. And the streams up there and the lakes have limestone. They can buffer it. And so in the beginning, pH didn't change. But years and years of this, it's going to lower that buffering ability. And then the pH starts just getting acidic. And for the brook trout, the adults don't care as much, but the fry and the eggs can't. They can only live at a certain pH, and it gets too acidic, reproduction is hurt. So anyway, that kind of shows you there's a natural buffering of the soil. The soils do in the rocks with acid rain, but at a certain point you overwhelm the buffer, and then the pH just have a huge effect. Right. So we'll look at a chemical buffer like that, and we'll see breathing gets rid of carbon dioxide. It's going to help your raise your pH, and then your kidneys can pee out hydrogen ions if you want to lower your pH too. All right, so in terms of these are the buffers, chemical buffers, and these work instantly. If I throw some acid in you, it's going to be buffered. It's not going to have an effect unless tons of acid, and then it will. But as long as you have enough buffer, it's going to stop it. So here, right, you're going to see that bicarbonate ions, when they're sitting around there, if you put a bunch of hydrogen ions in there from an acid, it's going to combine to make carbonic acid, which is a weak acid. And it's kind of a theme. You're going to see buffers will make a strong acid to a weak acid, or a strong base to a weak base. And so it's going to buffer things, and it'll work for a while. So bicarbonate's the big one. This is how carbon dioxide gets back to your lungs, remember? So carbon dioxide and water, remember the enzyme that's going to help combine carbon dioxide and water? Carbonic anhydrase. It's the enzyme that combines those two into carbonic acid. These are things you need to know. Also, phosphates happens a lot in the cells. And then proteins themselves. So you have, carboxyl group there that can, so this can take a hydrogen. Let's say there's lots of acid. It can combine to make COOH like that. And then if there's lots of base, that hydrogen can come off again. And even the amino group on a protein, that the hydrogen can come off when it's really too alkaline, or if it's too acidic, the hydrogen can combine onto the amino group. So that's what a buffer is about. It's depending on things are too acid or too alkaline, they can buffer. They can take those hydrogens out and hold on to them. If it's not enough hydrogen, it can release it. So that's what a buffer does. Yep. All right, so buffers, again, they temporarily and instantly will buffer against a lot of change to keep things really stable. But eventually, you've got to recharge your buffers. So how do we really get rid of too many hydrogen ions? And you guys know what two organs I'm talking about. How would you get rid of them? I've already talked about it. Kidneys, easy peasy. Tell your kidney tubules, get rid of hydrogen, or bicarbonate. Get rid of whatever you want to get rid of, and the kidneys can do it. So whether you're acidic or too alkaline, your kidneys can balance that. And your lungs, big time. The easiest way to make myself acidic is simply hold my breath. And then that carbon dioxide turns into carbonic acid, right? And become more acidic. The easiest way to make myself more alkaline, I don't have to buy alkaline water. I can just hyperventilate. I dump so much carbon dioxide that I become alkaline. So lungs and then kidneys work ultimately, after the buffers. All right, so respiration, definitely, so if we have too much acidity in our bodies, all we need to do is hyperventilate. And I dump carbon dioxide, and then I'm going to become less and less acidic, or more and more alkaline. And it can be a danger too. I talked about holding your breath after hyperventilating. You can become so alkaline that your vessels, you can pass out. Your vessels can constrict. Yeah. So what we notice is when acidity rises in our body, we notice this centrally, or we have some peripheral receptors that note, hey, it's getting more acidic. And that tells our respiratory center to breathe more rapidly and deeper. And that will get rid of the carbon dioxide pretty quickly. All right, you guys got it? It's called, we're going to see, it's called respiratory alkalosis or respiratory acidosis. It's just through breathing. So breathing's simple. You hold your breath, you become more acidic because you got more carbon dioxide building up. You breathe fast, you become more alkaline because you dump off too much carbon dioxide. So our body alters our breathing. You guys get on a treadmill, carbon dioxide is going to build up, and so you're going to become more acidic. You're going to breathe faster, and your heart will go faster too. All right. And then renally, let's say you guys are just Atkins diet, just eating proteins, no carbs. you're going to make a lot of sulfuric and phosphoric acid from those amino acids that have sulfur and phosphate in them. It's going to have a lot of hydrogen ions in you, and then just tell your kidney tubules, dude, we got too much hydrogen, and then they will pee it out. And then if we tested your urine, it would be more acidic. And went back to a normal diet, it would come up again. So your urine changes the acidity depending on how much your body needs to get rid of it. All right, we look at the timing. Chemically, it's instant, right? The breathing within minutes, you can do that. And it really, to pee it out can take days, right? So yeah, there's a little bit of difference here, but so your body's going to regulate pH, buffer, right? And then lungs and kidneys can get rid of acidity. All right, now when you get outside that range, 735, 745, you are not going to survive for very long, right? And we call the conditions you get, it would be acidosis or acidotic, right? Or alkalosis or doesn't matter. Alkalosis and acidosis, right? These are going to, what happens if your pH is too low or too high. And don't remember, low pH means acidity. High pH means alkaline, right? Yep. So acidosis, what can make you be acidotic? Well, the easiest way is to hold your breath. And then carbon dioxide builds up, right? Yeah. But it could be other things too. If you have actually a loss of bases, sometimes you have diarrhea where all that intestinal lining kind of comes off. It's mostly alkaline that can do that. Yeah. And then alkalosis would be if you hyperventilate, respiratory. You take a whole bunch of antacids, can do it as well. If you throw up stomach acid, you're going to become more alkalosis too. So, yep. So breathing, holding breath or hyperventilating is the easiest. Respiratory. We call the other one metabolic. And metabolic is when it's going to be kidneys or other organs. All right. Yeah, so here's the big things. In acidosis and alkalosis, respiratory is going to be from breathing, and metabolic is going to be your other organs. That simple. So respiratory acidosis, if you, it could be that you're holding your breath. It could be you're being strangled. It could be you have an obstruction. It could be a lung disease. So any of these things that prevent you from exchanging gases is getting rid of carbon dioxide. Yep. Metabolic wise, kidneys. If the kidneys can't get rid of the acids, it's going to keep building up there too. And then of course, ketoacidosis. You have too many ketones building up. Prolonged diarrhea, I talked about that, or vomiting. When you vomit, just your stomach contents would be acidic, but when you're vomiting intestinal contents too, bases will come up. Yeah, so alkalosis, how can you become too alkaline? Easiest thing is hyperventilation. So respiratory alkalosis is from breathing too fast. And it could be anxiety, someone breathes fast. If you're breathing in a paper bag, that will help because you're rebreathing carbon dioxide. But if you're breathing too fast, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide. And people that go at high altitudes and out of oxygen, they'll be hyperventilating too, and they'll actually become too alkaline because they get rid of too much carbon dioxide. Some poisoning, aspirin poisoning causes you to hyperventilate as well. And whenever your body temperature goes up, your breathing rate goes up too. So any kind of hyperventilation, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide. And that's going to change. And you guys know if you hyperventilate, then stop. I might have been talking a while. You don't have to breathe for a while, right? Because your body's like, okay. Yeah. And you can see metabolic, if you throw up a lot of stomach acid, or if you take a lot of antacids, that can do that as well. Yeah. Yep. So that's metabolic, and respiratory is simply hyperventilating. All right. I think I'll just leave this for you. This is something I found online. You can kind of take a look at it and see how good you guys are at this. So this last chapter, a couple quick lectures compared to urinary and respiratory. So those are the biggies on this test. But this, don't neglect this because I'll have questions on this as well. Fewer than the other two chapters, but important stuff. And you guys are interested in water balance, electrolytes, nutrition, things like that. So I think you should find it interesting. But yeah, don't forget, we'll talk about We'll talk about where the body fluids are, remember? Like intracellular, extracellular, the different compartments. And then water balance, how water comes in and how we lose it, right? Electrolytes, how they come in, how we lose them. And then talk quite a bit recently here about the acid base, acidosis and alkalosis, how we do that. All right. All right, sounds good. Read the chapter, good stuff. And all right, I think I'll end that here with this chapter done. Well, you're done listening to me lecture on it.